Jesus confronted religious leaders with their religious laws to protect and rescue a prostitute who was guilty. And by doing so, he overturned religious law. The story is in John chapter 8. Listen to this. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning, he came again into the temple. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and he taught them. And then the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say?" This they said, testing him, that they might have something with which to accuse him. And Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though we did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised up himself and said to them, "He who was without sin, let him cast the first stone at her." And again he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the youngest. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, sin no more." Jesus confronted religious leaders with their religious laws that came from the law of Moses. The law of Moses commanded that prostitutes be stoned to death. No ifs, buts, or exclusion clauses. Prostitutes, according to the law of Moses, should be killed. And the Pharisees wanted to put Jesus to the test. The religious leaders knew that Jesus was merciful and kind. And they said, "Let's put this guy to the test and let's see if he will contradict Moses. Then we'll have him." They knew he was merciful, but they weren't counting on his response. You see, they caught this woman in the very act of adultery. In the very act. Well, how did they know that she was right in the bed with that man? In the very act. They didn't say they saw her leave her home. They didn't say they saw her enter a house. They didn't say we could see from the distance that she entered the bedroom. They saw her in the very act. If you'd like to help get messages like these out into the world, please subscribe, click the thumbs up and the notifications button, and this will tap right into YouTube's algorithm, and then these messages will get circulated right around the globe. Please consider it. God bless you. This was a setup. How else would you know that this woman had left her home, went to the home of another man, and was in their bedroom at that very time, that very second, and catch them in the very act? Peeping Toms? They set it up. Where was the guy who committed adultery? They only dragged her in. They caught her in the very act. They dragged her out of the bed. They set it up. They couldn't know that she was in the very act unless they set it up. How could they see her? Well, they'd have to be in the bedroom. This was a setup. They dragged her in the very act. She was naked. They dragged her through the streets naked. And they brought her right into the temple where Jesus was teaching. And then they put the hard word on Jesus. Moses said in the law that she should be stoned. What do you say? They were wanting him to say something to get her off the hook. You broke the law of Moses. That's what religion does. It loves laws more than it loves people. And it points the finger. When they set her up, would Jesus contradict Moses? Well, Jesus said, those among you who has no sin, let him cast the first stone. You see, the law of Moses also said that if you were guilty of that same sin yourself, you were disqualified to point the finger. And then he bent down on the ground and he says he wrote on the ground. He wrote on the ground. Guys, he was at the temple precincts outside. It wasn't dirt. It was stone. So now we read of the finger writing on stone. This is the lawgiver who gave the law to not commit adultery. And as he began to write on the ground, they asked again, come on, what do you say, Jesus? Speak up. He who has no sin, as Moses said, if you're not guilty of the same sin, you can go. And you go ahead and just cast the stone at her. And then Jesus began to write on the stone. But this time, they walked away, one by one. You see, they disqualified themselves from stoning her because they were guilty of the same sin themselves. How did they know that she was in the very act of adultery? The very act of intimacy? They set it up. They were all her customers. They were all her customers. And one by one, he said, Reuben, you saw her such and such a day. Joshua, you saw her such and such a day. Levi, you saw her, and they all took off from the oldest to the youngest. They were talking to the person who was writing with the finger of God on stone. And they all took off. Jesus was left alone. And he said, woman, where are your accusers? They're gone. Jesus said, he who has no sin, let him cast the first stone. He was the only one who was without sin, and he should have, under religious law, stoned this woman to death. But he did not follow the law of Moses. He overturned the law of Moses. Because people are more important than religious rules. And she said, no one is here to condemn me. And he said, neither do I condemn you. Go, you're free. Leave your life of sin. In the atmosphere of unconditional love and acceptance and no judgment, you feel safe. And in that atmosphere of love and mercy and compassion and safety and no condemnation, neither do I condemn you, the power of sin is broken. Love breaks the power of sin, not law. Jesus confronted religious leaders and religious law, and he overturned them both to protect a prostitute. That's the Jesus and God I love.